Hello everyone, my name is Swapneel and I will be talking about uncovering badness using passive DNS. A little bit about me. So I run a company called so I'm based out of India and I run a company called as Shrestha IT. I am also a board member of India Internet Engineering Society. I'm an APNet community trainer as well. And I also, actively participate in the network operator groups as well as security communities, primarily in the Asia Pacific region. So I'll be talking about I'll be covering the basics of passive DNS as well as who should be using passive DNS. I will also share a few experiences of how I have used passive DNS and hopefully take a lot of questions at the very end. So Florian Weimar presented a paper at the 17th conference, the 17th first conference in 2005. The idea, so I won't be going into details of the paper, but I highly recommend that you check that out. The idea is very simple, is to record cache miss DNS queries as seen in a recursive resolver and store them in a database for later reference. The database can then be queried using a RESTful API. Here is a simple representation of a network having an on-premise recursive resolver. So in the context of passive DNS, the recursive resolver, the passive DNS sensor software would get installed in the recursive resolver and would record and store the cache miss DNS queries. So in this specific example, the DNS transaction or the DNS A record for r2-d2.info would get stored in the passive DNS database. By the way, if you're a Star Wars fan, I would highly urge you to look at the domains mentioned in the specific slides. Too bad, I have already registered them and I use them as spam traps. SDI.net.info is a domain name which I have registered and is my way of paying homage to Clifford Storm. So why passive DNS? So DNS, everything on the internet begins with a DNS query. DNS is used for legitimate purposes and also abused by the bad actors. For example, domain names registered for ransomware, domain names primarily used for phishing, as well as botnets and for other malicious purposes. Domain names are also cheap. You can buy domain names at a very minimal amount of cost. And 99. So there has also been a study which points out that 99% of the domain names which are registered are primarily used for malicious purposes. So say for example, if you're investigating a suspicious domain name, doing a forward lookup poses some sort of a risk, especially in the context that it may trip the bad actors. Also the fact that the malicious domain name might, accessing it in a, let's say, a web browser will not be a good idea. The other element is the forward lookups do not also provide us ability to map the interconnections. So what do I mean by mapping the interconnections? So as an example, correlation of domain names, name servers, and IP addresses, or more specifically, answering questions like what other domains were using the same IP address as the DNS A record, or what other domains were using the same set of name servers, or what other domains were using the same MX record. So this is where passive DNS is extremely useful. So in this context, say for example, we're investigating a suspicious domain name, and we identify that the domain name is pointing to a specific IP address. What we could do is we could take the IP address and we could do a reverse search in the passive DNS database to see what other domains are, or rather were, using this IP address. Similarly, we could take other DNS records like name servers and MX records and do a reverse search and find out which other name servers, which other domains were using the same name servers, or which other domains were using the same MX. Who should be using passive DNS? I think anyone who is working in security or looking at domain name abuse in the DNS namespace will find passive DNS extremely useful. Having said that, incident responders looking at malicious domain names or suspicious domain names, as well as law enforcement folks will find passive DNS very, very useful. So there are, I have outlined a few passive DNS operators. All of them provide some sort of a free account with limit to the number of queries that you can do per day as well as per month. But all of them provide a RESTful API, and I am in this specific in the context of this presentation, I'm using the Spamhaus Passive DNS database to give you a few examples. So in the last year or so, there have been numerous reports of incidents of domain name hijacking or domain name takeover, where a lot of domains at specific registrars have been hijacked. So in this specific presentation, I will be focusing on the domain name shadowing attack or domain name hijacking attack at GoDaddy. Now, this doesn't imply that GoDaddy is the only registrar which is affected by this issue, but there have been others as well. But GoDaddy is the largest, and so I'll demonstrate this specific attack, or I'll use the passive DNS to identify this specific attack in the DNS namespace. So I have links to this specific the reports from Spamhaus as well, so you can look into going into detail into what these specific attacks were. But moving on. So what is domain shadowing attack? In the case of domain shadowing attack, basically the attackers gain access credentials of domain names, legitimate domain names, and what they do is they create DNS records or subdomains which point to the attacker hosting infrastructure, which ideally consists of comprise of malware or phishing content. So here is an example of a domain shadowing attack at GoDaddy. So in this specific context, the attackers, the bad actors, are creating a subdomain record pxi.domain.tld, where domain.tld is the affected domain, which is a CNAME record pointing to voxpk.duckdns.org, and voxpk.duckdns.org points to a specific IP address, and that is having hosting infrastructure, which is basically spam and phishing and so on, and it's under a specific AS. Here is a lookup of an affected domain, incometaxnotice.in. And you can see that from the whois output that the name servers of the specific domain, or rather the domain is registered through GoDaddy. Unfortunately, it's not showing what the name servers are, but you can identify that the domain is registered with GoDaddy. Here is a lookup of that specific domain or the IP address or that specific domain, incometaxnotice.in, in the Spamhaus passive DNS using the API. And the output is, as you can see, is in JSON, and it's listing all the records which the passive DNS database has seen. So it is listing out the DNS-A record. It is also listing out the DNS-NS record and the DNS CNAME record as well. Here is the specific CNAME record with regards to the domain hijacking attack or domain shadowing attack, and you can see that there is the DNS record pxi.incometax.in CNAME record has been created to point to voxpk.duckdns.org. So let's run through this specific example, and I'll show you a quick demo of looking up into the passive DNS database to find out what other badness that we can find inside the database. So what we are doing here is the fact. So what we are doing here is we are basically looking at searching for all records or for the domain voxpk.duckdns.org, the DNS-A record more specifically, using the Spamhaus passive DNS database, and trying to find out what other records exist in the passive DNS database. So it tells us that there are a few entries that the passive DNS database has seen. It also shows various other parent. Again, this is the example output is in JSON, and what it is showing us is what was the time when the passive DNS database has seen this information. I'm hopeful that you're able to see the output. So in this case, I have a script called as edge time, and what edge time does is it is converting epoch time to something that we can identify with. So another thing what we are doing is we are looking at all the other domains in the passive DNS database for this attack which has occurred with regards to pxi.domain.tld. So we are able to see that there are a number of other domains which have been affected. So this is how passive DNS database can help us in identifying which other domains were pointing to a specific IP, or which other domains were using the specific CNAME. So in this case, we did a reverse search. We took voxpk.duckdns.org, which is the infrastructure or the domain name which the bad actors are controlling. And we did a reverse search inside the passive DNS database to find out which other domains are pointing to having a CNAME record to voxpk.duckdns.org. Here is another example of an affected domain. So as you can see, pxi.fiskfresh.in, and you can see there is a suspicious PHP script. Here is one more, which is the same one, which is test.php. It looks like a spam script, suspicious spam script uploaded by the malicious actors. Here is a phishing URL which is impersonating the DHL website, impersonating DHL for that matter. But at the same time, you can see that this is the same pxi.domain.tld. Moving on, what I'd like to also do is give you another example of using the passive DNS database to look at uncovering badness in more ways. So here is an example of a phishing domain, a targeted domain created by the bad actors to impersonate the Commonwealth Bank of Australia. So when we look at when we take the domain name, the specific domain name, the malicious domain name, and we look for that domain name inside the passive DNS database, we can see that there are a number of records that are showing up. In fact, there are 4 NS records which are showing up here. So this is telling us that there are these name servers. In fact, this domain has been registered through Google Domains, and we can see that here are 4 name servers, authoritative name servers of that domain. More specifically, we are also now able to see from the passive DNS JSON output that this specific domain is, or rather was pointing to 52.189.217.143. Now what we could do is we can take that IP and we can do a reverse search inside the passive DNS database and find out which other domains were also pointing to that same IP address. And if you're able to see the screen, you can see that there is a whole lot of badness. There is a whole lot of suspicious, malicious domain names which have been created purposefully for targeted phishing attacks impersonating the Commonwealth Bank of Australia. Here is another example which I'd like to demonstrate using passive DNS. So you can see that there is a very suspicious domain name that I could find, and this specific domain name was pointing to an IP address and had 2 sets of name servers. So what we will also do is we will now look into the passive DNS database and search for all other domains which were using the same name servers, that is ns1.dnsbonline.ru. So when we do that, we can historically see a lot of suspicious domain names, a lot of domain names which primarily look like DGAs created for malicious or suspicious purposes. And it gives you an idea into how the bad actors use DNS, the DNS ecosystem, the DNS namespace, and primarily have the same set of name servers for thousands and thousands of malicious domain names. Here is another example which I'd like to share with you. Is a friend of mine, Chris, posted this on Twitter some time back. And he had received an SMS which basically was nothing but a PayPal phishing, had a PayPal phishing link. So when I took the domain name and when I looked into the passive DNS database, if you see the second image on this specific slide, I could literally find thousands of domains, PayPal impersonating PayPal, and it basically uncovers a lot of badness. So doing technically when you're investigating, just looking at forward lookups, it doesn't give you this mapping of the interconnections. That's where passive DNS is extremely useful. Speaking of PayPal, passive DNS can also be used to search for a specific string, not only domain names, but you can also use passive DNS to search for a specific string. And this is extremely useful when you are investigating, when you're a brand management company or where you have a brand and you want to protect your brand, when you, especially in the case of a bank, you would like to know which other domains are being registered with my bank name. This is where passive DNS also is extremely useful, gives an idea about what other domains is having the string in it. Right? So the summary is the passive DNS enables investigation of abuse in the DNS ecosystem. It enables anyone to map the interconnections of the bad actors. But the important thing to understand is any passive DNS database you take may not have a full picture, because it all primarily depends on the passive DNS sensors that the passive DNS operator is running, and nobody will have the full picture in any case. And very importantly, I have always been, in the entire presentation that I've done, I've always said that what other domains we're pointing to, or what other domains we're using the name servers, or what other domains we're using the MX record. So this is important because passive DNS is a historical database. It's not a real-time database. There has also been work which is being done with regards to standardizing the output format. So multiple passive DNS operators do not have at this point of time, do not have the standardization. So there is an RFC for passive DNS common output format. So you can go ahead and look that up as well. There are references on the slides, and I believe the slides will also go on the website. So if you have anything that you would like to dig deeper into whatever I have discussed about, you can actually look into the references section. In case if you have any questions, please feel free and reach out. I will also be there on the Discord channel. This is my contact information. Feel free to reach out with regards to any questions you have. And with this, I'd like to end my presentation, and looking forward to your questions. Thank you.
All right. Hopefully, so that's the end of the first presentation. So I guess we can go ahead and take questions from anyone who may have questions for Swapneel. Hold on. Hopefully there's at least a few. We'll see. His presentation is the shortest of the three. Which is all good though. So we'll give it a minute or two just for the live stream to catch up, just to see if anyone has any questions or anything. We will be posting the slides soon. All right, so Gary asked, so are you capturing your own DNS traffic, or are you using publicly available passive DNS databases, and what are the pros and cons of each? So Swapneel has is not in the Discord call at this very second. he said his system was having some small issues, but he hopefully he'll see him message back in just a second. Oh, so all right. Swapneel has joined back.
Hey, Logan.
Hey, so far there's been two questions. So, it might be good to start with like maybe Grant. So, do you want to ask yourself, Grant?
Yeah, this is Roger.
Oh, Roger.
I
Sorry.
have a simple question, but what exactly is a passive DNS? Is it just basically a DNS on a person's computer that's been maliciously rerouted?
No. Passive DNS is basically a kind of a database where any recursive resolver, right? So anyone who is running a recursive resolver can run a passive, something called as a passive DNS sensor software. And what this sensor software does is it records all the cache miss DNS queries. So what I mean by cache miss DNS queries is whenever you access any domain name, if the resolver doesn't have the answer in its cache, it will go down the delegation chain and find the answer, right? So that is a cache miss DNS query, and that is the one which would go get stored in a passive DNS database. Now, there are a couple of related questions with regards to. I think somebody Parky TN has asked a question: are you capturing your own DNS traffic or using publicly available passive DNS databases? So in this case, I am using the Spamhaus passive DNS database to hunt or search for malicious domain names. So it's like a historical database which tells me what at what point of time was this domain pointing to which IP address or what name servers was it using. I hope I have answered that question satisfactorily. If you have any follow-up questions, please let me know.
Okay, I think that answers my question.
Cool. There was one more follow-up question with regards to is it a publicly available passive DNS database and what are the pros and cons of each? So you can run your own passive DNS, rather you can set up or configure your own passive DNS database, but the requirement in that specific case is that you will need to run passive DNS sensor software because you need to have more coverage, right? You need to get cache miss DNS traffic or DNS queries, and that is only going to be possible if you run more sensor software in different vantage points. So in order to do that, you need a big coverage. You need to have large number of recursive resolvers which you control. The advantage with using public passive DNS databases like, let's say, Spamhaus or Farsight Security is the fact that these folks have been running passive DNS sensor software in large number of resolvers. And because of that, they see more traffic. They see more DNS queries, that is cache miss DNS queries. That is the reason why their database is much, I would say, large in comparison to, say, for example, if I run my own passive DNS database, or if I configure my own passive DNS database and I'm only running a single passive DNS sensor software in my recursive resolver, that is going to be very limited, vantage point view into the DNS ecosystem. So anyone can set up a passive DNS database, but it requires large number of sensors, which means more people who are running recursive resolvers. You need to run your passive DNS sensor software. So there is a very interesting project. I'll just put the link in the Discord. So the project is called as D4. So D4 allows you to. It's an open source software which you can use to run your own passive DNS database, or other set up your own passive DNS database. But as I said, if you have just one recursive resolver where you're running this, or if you have just a few recursive resolvers where you're running this, the amount of data that you will see, or the volume of data that you will see, is going to be very small in comparison to what the public passive DNS databases provide, like let's say Farsight, or passive DNS database, or a Spamhaus passive DNS database. I hope that answers.
So do you see a lot of companies using this kind of passive technique to monitor their own domain names to try and tackle spam websites trying to have their customers' data stolen?
Oh, absolutely. There are a lot of brand management companies. So, brand management companies are protecting brand assets such as domain names for large enterprises. So, these companies primarily use, not only these companies, but even law enforcement, anyone who is working in, as I said, in security, maybe even a SOC analyst who is investigating a suspicious domain name, uses passive DNS to find out. Like, as an example, to your point with regards to brand management companies, say for example, I am a bank, right, and I want to know what other domains have been registered by anyone which has my bank name in it. Like, let's say for example, Bank of America, right? So I want to know any domain name that has been registered which has Bank of America in it, which could be bankofamerica.in, or it could be bankofamerica.co.in, or it could be anything else. So this passive DNS database provides an understanding that there is somebody who has registered a domain which is similar to the Bank of America legitimate website.
Um,
Sparky TN has a comment. Thank you for the answers. I agree that the public databases provide the most coverage and data, but I thought capturing your own enterprise DNS traffic offers an additional avenue for threat hunting and insight. Oh, absolutely. So on that element, it's I completely agree with you. The only I would say legwork or challenges to set up the database in such a way that it provides you an API which you can then use to query. But otherwise, also assuming that you are, let's say, for example, you are running your own recursive DNS resolver inside the enterprise network, you would ideally be taking the logs and sending it to a scene which for further investigation, say for example. So in that context also, you already would have something which is similar. uh, they have a follow-up question: how will passive DNS address the move to DNS over HTTP, that is DO? That's an excellent question. I think in the case of the passive DNS operators, it doesn't matter. End of the day, it doesn't matter whether it is DOH or DOT or classic DO53. The reason is because it's the cache miss DNS queries, which means that in the case of DOH is basically encrypting communication between the client, that is the stub resolver, and the recursive resolver. In the case of passive DNS, cache miss DNS queries, that is queries which the recursive resolver does not have in its cache, that is queries from the recursive resolvers upwards to the delegation chain or towards the authoritative. Those are the queries which are getting stored in the passive DNS database. So for the passive DNS operators, it is not going to cause any problems per se. So they will still be able to you know add queries into the cache miss queries into the passive DNS database. I hope that answers it.
so do you have any information? So let's say that your companies do this and they discover there are some malicious actors attempting to have their domains fool other people. Do you know like what steps that those companies can then take in order to get those domains taken down or anything like that, or is it just kind of a cat and mouse trying to inform the consumers, hey, don't use this kind of website? Is there not a lot they can do to something like that?
I will address this question a bit differently. So, in my personal case, apart from my day job, on an individual capacity, I primarily look into malicious domain names which are part of .in. .in is a country code TLD for India. So I primarily research and look into domains which are malicious domains which are impersonating bank websites of India or government websites, government assets in India, and so on. So in my personal capacity, what I have been doing is I share this threat intelligence on a day-to-day basis with the CERT, the Indian CERT, and then what they do is they take down these domains by talking to the to the the right channel for that matter. But a lot of companies, what they would ideally do is they would follow a similar path where they would, once they identified that these are suspicious or malicious domain names, they would pass this information to the certs or to the TLDs directly. So TLDs also have a abuse channel, so you could directly. So if you find a domain name which is malicious, you could absolutely contact the TLD abuse and provide them evidence with regards to why this specific domain is malicious, say for example, and they would absolutely take it down. So I've been doing it for a few years now, and pretty much any kind of abuse that I have sent to any cert or any TLD, say for example, has been taken down.
Have you noticed this becoming harder and harder with things like Unicode being allowed in domain names? So it makes it harder to actually search for. So let's say that it's Bank of America and they register a domain name with the A's all being a Unicode A. So you can't. So if you search for Bank of America, it doesn't come up because is searching for the Unicode letter A instead. Have you noticed a lot of malicious domains using things like Unicode character?
Yeah, so you mean the internationalized domain names, the IDNs, right?
Yeah.
So that's a excellent question. So at this point of time, in the research that I have been doing with regards to focusing primarily in the .in domains as well as domains which belong to APAC region, say for example, I have not seen that large use case of IDN domains, but I believe that is going to slowly catch on. The one thing I'll share with all of you here is the fact that uh, pre-COVID and in this current COVID era that we are into right now, I have seen that the number of malicious domain names, especially in the .in context or even generally, has probably gone up 3 times or 4 times than what I have seen prior to COVID. So I don't know what is happening there, but surely I believe the IDN domains are also going to be abused in a very similar manner. By the way, the passive DNS databases which I talked about, like let's say Spamhaus passive DNS database or Farsight passive DNS database or any others, also support IDN search. So you can also search the passive DNS database for IDN domains. So that helps you there as well.
Okay. Does anyone else have any other questions? We'll probably just give it a second or two just for the live stream to catch up. Just make sure there's no other stuff.
Oh, sure, absolutely.
I guess the only comment I have, I find it really surprising. You said 99% of DNS queries were maliciously used.
Oh no, actually, I mentioned that there has been a study which basically looks at uh, the use case of domain names, and the study says 99% of the domain names which are registered are used for malicious purposes.
Oh.
So a lot of domain names, even when I have been investigating in a very small way in my individual capacity, I see a lot of domain names which are basically uh, created or generated using the TGAs, domain generation algorithms. And those are primarily created by the adversaries or the bad actors for malicious purposes.
All right. Cool.
It looks like Sparky has a another question for you. So it looks like in the presentation you use curl for your requests. Are there other tools to query passive databases?
All of the passive DNS operators provide a GUI, but I'm a command line. I would say I love the command line, so that's the reason why I have used curl to primarily look into the database. But you could, I think there are multiple, ways in which you could actually look into passive DNS databases. Now, as an example, just to sidetrack a bit, I can give another example. If you are aware of the tool Maltigo, so Maltigo is a tool which primarily is used largely by law enforcement folks for investigating, again, not only uh, DNS abuse but a lot of other things as well. I'll put a link to the tool as well in the Discord. So there are something called as multi-go transformations for passive DNS database operators. So I for sure know that Farsight Security, which is a passive DNS operator, has a multi-go transformation which you can use. I also know that there are a lot of automation tools which integrate with passive DNS. So, say for example, there is another command line tool called as DNSDBQ, which is used by or rather which is used. It's a tool built in C, which allows you to query the Farsight passive DNS database. So I'll just put a link to both of the.
I'll go ahead and any links that he puts into the Discord, I'll also go ahead and paste into the YouTube chat for everybody.
Right. So that's the multi-go transformation for Farsight, as well as DNSDBQ, which is again a tool which is primarily used for querying the Farsight database as well as the Circle database.
Cool, thank you.
No problem.
Well, I think that's probably most of the questions. We'll probably give another just minute just to make sure there's no other questions. But thank you for taking the time to give the presentation and do the Q&A.
No problem at all. Thanks for having me. I hope it has been useful, and looking forward to the other set of talks as well.
I am too. Yeah. So if anyone has any other questions, though, always feel free to post them in the Discord on YouTube, and just say that they're for Swapneel. We'll go ahead and make sure that he gets them. All right. Well, it looks like that's all the questions. Do we want to do something for 20 minutes to pad it out to noon? Or do we want to just start lunch a little early? Yeah, sucks you can't hear all. I should have made like a clap track.
Thank you for the feedback.
So how did you initially get into doing IT work then, Swapneel?
Well, that's a very interesting question. I think that is going to take more than the 20 minutes that you have. I've, I think just to probably summarize a bit, I have been always been interested in computers and systems and stuff like that. So I, from a very early age, thanks to my parents for giving me the internet around 20-25 years ago. Having said that, let me also put on the record that I'm not that old, although there are a lot of white hair on my head. But okay, moving on. So that's been the journey so far, and been interested in security as well. Learning every day incrementally, and learning from different folks. Getting to know people from, especially in this specific time that we are living in. It's also been, to be very honest, it's also been an opportunity to be a part of different virtual conferences and present and learn as much as possible as well. There's been a lot of fatigue on a lot of webinars as well, but I think that's part of it. I hope that answers your question in a
Sure.
very small way.
So what kind of challenges have you seen since COVID started for things like IT work? Have you seen a whole lot of transitional issues where people aren't very good at working from home and stuff like that, or has that already been kind of normalized in the area of work that you work in?
No, I think the biggest the problem has been with regards to so from an enterprise perspective, you have the enterprise has all security in place, policies in place, but now when COVID stuck everybody working from home, the biggest challenge was also to look at kind of securing the endpoint devices which are now connecting probably from hostile networks, right? And that's where the real challenge lies. And I also believe a lot of companies are now starting to pay attention to security of home networks, because going forward, I think that's going to be a very, very important area to also look at. I think just yesterday, Malware Jake, I don't know if you guys follow him, but Malware Jake posted a very interesting question, I think a day or so ago. His question was, if there is malware, if you know that your employee is working from home and they have another system in the network, in the home network, and that is infected with malware, as an enterprise, as an organization, what will you do? So there were four set of. I'll probably put the tweet in the Discord channel. But just to summarize, his question was: as an enterprise, will you assist the employee to put certain security measures even on their home devices, or will you not care about it, or a couple of more questions? So I think that's a very interesting thing, because people are now starting to look at that space as well, and that's been, in my opinion, in the last 6 to 7 months, has been the most difficult to cater to.
Okay. Um. Gosh. Uh. Uh.
Just a thing on that article you just brought up. Do you have a link to that one? I'd actually be interested in that. I'm
The
working from
malware,
home.
yeah. I'm just trying to find out the tweet which he put out. I think it was a couple of days ago. Just give me a few more seconds, and I think I shall have it for you.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't think there's any other questions related to the talk coming through. So I think we will probably be good to go for now. So we're gonna here at noon we'll break for lunch, and so um, if you have food, go ahead and eat it, or don't. You do you. And at 1 p.m. we will resume um, with the next talk, which will be Connor, I believe. Let me look at the schedule. Connor, yes.
Right. I just put out the tweet that I was mentioning about, the poll.
Cool, thank you.
It is a very interesting question about, how would they handle that, because I think it really depends on the malware though too, because some malware that's probably not gonna be a problem, but other malware that could really, because if it's able to hop and infect your company's, your corporate laptop, it doesn't really matter if you have a VPN or not, because if they gain control of that laptop, they can still siphon that off even before it goes into the VPN through your router then.
Exactly. So the lateral movement is always a possibility.
Which is everyone gets hotspots. I think I saw somewhere that remote desktop vulnerabilities and attacks have significantly increased. And I think it was that what Shodan, whoever, said that they've seen a significant increase in the number of remote desktop, like opened remote desktop connections, that like servers that you can remote desktop into that are unprotected have significantly increased as they scan they scan like all the IPs, and they check for that port, and they've seen a significant increase in number of remote desktops with that port opened, just
Right.
open to the public. So I think we'll definitely see in the future an increase in people who have the knowledge and ability to safely secure corporate networks for a work from home standpoint.
On the same point, I hope I'm not delaying your lunch.
Oh no, no. Technically, it doesn't start till noon, so I think we're good.
So on the same point, one interesting thing which and probably kind of a plug which I will give it to a company called as Corelight is the fact that they have released a sensor which you can install on a Raspberry Pi, which allows you to kind of tap into all your logs, or rather your PCAPs, and you know do something similar which you could do with let's say security onion as an ISO distribution, where you're taking suricata as well as Zeek, and you're looking at taking the PCAPs, the live PCAPs, using a span or a tap port. So that is something that they have done very recently, and let me put the so they have just gone ahead and taken the network security monitoring as a concept for home network.